Good afternoon. This is Michelle Young, Executive Director of the University Council for Educational Administration with the UCEA webinar series on education leadership. The series continues today with a presentation by Katina Stapleton and James Benson, IES Program Officers for the Improving Education Systems Program. Katina and James are going to share information about the research funding and opportunities available through IES for fiscal year 2014 for educational leadership researchers. And they will be giving focused attention to issues requiring special consideration in grant proposals focused on education research. If listeners have questions, we urge you to place them in the chat box and go ahead and submit them. And we will be turning to questions as we move through the webinar and then again at the end when we have a Q&A time. Katina Stapleton is a program officer within the National Center for Education Research, NCER, the Institute of Education Sciences, IES. She co-manages the Improving Education Systems, Policy, Organization, Management, and Leadership Research Program. And she also oversees NCER's portfolio of grants on education leadership. She holds a PhD in political science from Duke University, where she specialized in political communication and school reform. Before joining IES, Dr. Stapleton worked at Syracuse University, where she was an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and a senior research associate in the Campbell Institute for Public Affairs. Our second guest is James Benson. James Benson is a program officer at NCER as well within the Institute of Education Sciences. He manages the Continuous Improvement Research and Education Research Program and co-manages the Improving Education Systems, Policies, Organization, Management, and Leadership Research. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he studied social stratification and was a fellow in the Interdisciplinary Training Program in the Education Sciences, which was funded by IES. Prior to joining IES, he worked as a postdoctoral researcher for the Wisconsin Scholars Longitudinal Study. He is published on the Neighborhood Contribution to Early Childhood Learning Inequality, and his dissertation research addressed the relation between state finance policies and post-secondary attainment for community college students. And on behalf of UCA, I want to warmly welcome both of you. We really appreciate that you've taken time to work with us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share. So take it away.
Thank you, Michelle, for inviting us. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our presentation today. When we were putting this presentation together, we wanted to start first with what we do and relating that exactly to what your organization does. And so what I tried to do is align the priorities of UCEA with our IES priorities. So the first question I asked was, if you were looking for funding for education leadership research, what type of research would you be doing? And so it seemed to me that faculty who were associated with UCEA would be looking at research that was about the essential problems of schooling and leadership practice, that you would be looking at how we can best develop education leaders, and you also probably are thinking about education leadership in the broader context of education policy. So I wanted to say that you would also be looking at how to improve local, state, and national education policy. So that's what we think your researchers think is important. And let's turn a little bit to IES. The Institute of Education Sciences is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. So this has a little bit of an animation, so we're going to have to click through the slides. Thank you. Our mission has three parts. It's first to describe the condition and progress of education in the United States. We're trying to identify education practices that work best for students, and we want to make sure there's access to educational opportunities for all students. And then IES as an institution also is charged with evaluating the effectiveness of federal and other education programs. IES is actually a fairly large organization in several ways. We are split up into 4 different units, each of which is aligned with the research goals we just discussed. So we have our Office of the Director, and we're overseen by a National Board for Education Sciences, and we have another office called Standards and Review. We're going to talk a little bit about them later. They're the office that is charged with our review process. So when you apply for funding from the National Center for Education Research or the National Center for Special Education Research, they are in charge of that entire process. So if you look down the organizational chart, you'll see that we have 4 centers. The National Center for Education Statistics is probably the most well-known. They're the organization charged with describing the condition and progress of education. And so you're probably very familiar with some of the large data sets and surveys that are coming from NCS. The National Center for Educational Evaluation does most of our evaluations of the effectiveness of federal programs, and they're also probably best known for their regional education laboratories, as well as the What Works Clearinghouse, which evaluates the quality of studies about education intervention. And so if you look to the right, you'll see that there are 2 centers that we have focused on particularly. The first is my center, where James and I work, and that's the National Center for Education Research. And then the second is the National Center for Special Education Research. It's our charge to fund research on how to improve education, pre-K to adult. And we do that largely through grant funding. So across all of our research programs, we have a number of objectives that we've broken up into really 3 large categories. So the first one is to locate or develop, if we need to, educational interventions. We define that very broadly. It could be programs, practice, policies, approaches that work. So we were looking for interventions that are actually going to enhance academic achievement. And we want to make sure that these are interventions that don't only work in really narrow settings for very small populations. We're hoping to find things that could have large impact. So on one hand, we're looking for things that work. On the other side, we're trying to identify things that don't work so that we can give guidance to the field about interventions or practices or policies that probably should be stopped, and also to see whether or not there's segments of things that don't work that could be improved. So we're thinking this is a springboard to further research to keep improving things. And then we fund a type of research where we're looking to make connections. We're trying to see what underlies what theories, mediators, moderators, etc., that underlie how and why interventions work or don't work, and look at variation. And so these research objectives are going to underlie what we're going to later discuss as goals. So we'll talk about this a little bit further then. So we have a very, to me at least, large numbers of opportunities for people to apply for grant funding. And we have a basic overview webinar that we've had it already for this season, but if you were to go to our website, you could get the slides that would show you all of the opportunities that we have this year. But because we wanted to target this presentation to the best places to apply to study education leadership, we've targeted to these 2 programs here. So if you were to go to our listing of funding opportunities, you'll first see that You'll see a name of the opportunity, and you're going to see something that's called a CFDA number. And so they start at A and go all the way, I believe, to H this year. 84305A refers to our Education Research RFA, and that's our largest funding mechanism. Within the Education Research RFA, there are a multitude of topics, which you'll see in a second, and one of them is improving education systems, policies, organizations, management, and leadership. And that's a bit of a mouthful to swallow. And then the second one, if you go back a slide, is partnerships and collaborations focused on problems in practice or policy grants program. Also a large mouthful, so we'll probably abbreviate these as the conversation goes on. What's really important to see right away is that it's actually the larger education research RFA that you would be applying to, and within that there's the topic improving education systems. Interchangeably throughout this webinar and in practice, we go between calling these things topics or research programs, but there is a little bit of a difference that we'll explain later. And then again, we have the new partnerships and collaborations RFA that James is going to discuss in depth in a few minutes. Now we're good. All right, so what is improving education system? So the Improving Education Systems portfolio is both a portfolio grant that James and I monitor and a topic within the Education Research RFA. And so for the purpose of our current request for applications for the FY 2014 funding cycle, it's best if you think of it as a topic. So within the Education Research RFA, all applicants have to pick something that's called a topic and something that's called a goal. And each of them has a list of choices. So the topic is a rough approximate of what's your research about. And so we include topics like reading and writing, math and science, social behavioral, early childhood research, etc. And so for the majority of people who are doing work on leadership, the appropriate topic is going to be improving education systems. And by majority, I mean 95% probably. There will be a few people who are doing work that might end up in another topic. For the most part, though, you'd be applying to improving education systems. So once we've established that you're in the right place in terms of topic, we would then want to turn to what's the exact research question that you're trying to answer, and what are the research methods that are aligned with that. And that's going to determine what goal. So keep in mind, one topic, one goal. So in front of you, you see the list of the current topics within the 84305A Education Research RFA. Again, you can see that there's a full range of things. Some of them refer to teaching and learning. Some of them refer to special populations. And we have bundled together many things into improving education systems. So our improving education systems portfolio, as opposed to our thinking of this as a research topic, has been around since 2004. And so it's changed names and focus many times. When I started in 2005, we had one umbrella topic called Education, Finance, Leadership, and Management. And at the time, we really wanted to encourage more researchers who studied education leadership to apply. And so we split the topic into two: education policy, finance, and systems, and education leadership. So if you were to go to our website today and you were looking for education leadership grants, the majority of them would be found under the heading Education Leadership. About a year or so later, we also added a topic on middle and high school reform, and then there's actually probably a couple more topics that I haven't included on this slide. I believe in 2012 is when we decided to merge all of these portfolios back together, because we think everyone working in this area is really trying to do one thing, and that's improving education systems. We added the subhead to give people a little bit of guidance about what would fall into this larger category. As you can see, we've had a little over 65 projects since 2004, depending on which of the other grant programs we include in this count. So it varies a little bit, but 65 is a good estimate. And within that, there have been 15 education leadership projects. The majority of them are in the education leadership topic area, though there are a few that are in the old education policy portfolio, as well as some new ones funded under Improving Education Systems. I would also like to mention that that was not our only avenue for funding education leadership research. Two of our research and development centers, including our Research and Development Center on School Choice that was located at Vanderbilt University, and our center called the National Center for Analysis of Longitudinal Data in Education Research, or CALDR, also conducted studies on education leadership. So that gives you an overview of where we've been in this past. This year, the focus of our Improving Education Systems topic, for which you would be applying for grant funding, is to support research to improve student learning through direct improvement of school systems. And so that can include organization and management of schools. It could look at organization and management of school districts, so LEAs, SEAs, other ways of organizing things at the regional level, charter schools, districts, etc. We actually have funded a few studies that look at private schooling underneath this type of topic, though those types of applications are much more rare. And so the topic also includes anything that can be considered a policy that's meant to improve education systems as a whole or the components. I think one easy way to think about this is that we're trying to look at the big picture of how to make schools better, as opposed to looking at the nitty-gritty of what's happening within the classroom. So within the large umbrella topic of improving education systems, we're going to be funding work on education leadership. We made sure that was in the subhead of the title because we didn't want people to think incorrectly that we weren't concerned about funding projects on education leadership because we bundled them all together in one topic. We found in previous years that people were having trouble if they're saying we have a project to help school leaders reduce truancy. Is it a policy? Is it a leadership project, etc.? And so we decided it was easier and more beneficial to the field if we group these things together. So if you are trying to do research that relates to school leaders that are already leaders at the K through 12 level, then your research belongs here. And so this spans a wide range of what school leaders do and who school leaders are. So we're looking at principals, vice principals, superintendents, school boards, managers of charter school districts, teacher leaders, etc. If you are doing research on teacher leaders, and you're not sure what side of the line your research is on, is this really focusing on teachers in leadership roles versus the regular work of teachers in the classroom, please contact us so we can let you know whether or not it's more appropriate to apply to this topic or to our topic, effective teachers and effective teaching. So we are encouraging people to apply to study almost anything that's related to leaders. But there are a few things that we wanted to point out that we think are pretty critical. And these examples we've actually put into the current RFA if you'd like to refer back to it. And so the first question that struck us is that we really don't know very much about the different things that leaders need to do. We know some things, but not enough, and we don't necessarily know how those different roles relate to student achievement. We want to know more about the skills and knowledge needed by schools and district leaders to work in these different roles. And so what I mean by different roles is, for example, a principal that's acting as an instructional leader, as opposed to a principal that's acting essentially as the chief budget officer for their school, or a principal acting as the head of HR by hiring and assigning teachers to different classrooms. We really want to see work that's on professional development for existing leaders. We want to see research on the leadership pipeline. So how do we recruit quality people into education leadership? How do we know that they have the skills needed, et cetera? And once we have them in place, how do we retain them, especially at hard-to-staff, high-need schools? We'd love to see more research on licensure and certification, and we have an entire goal around evaluation and assessment of leaders across the full range, so formative, summative, as well as value-added systems.
So Katina, before you go on,
Sure.
One question that has come up is, so there's professional development on your list, and there's skills and knowledge needed by school and district leaders on your list, but there's not preparation on your list. Can you say a few things about why preparation is typically isn't really not included on this list? And then also, going back to a few slides back, why so few? Why only 15 since 2004?
Okay, so I will address the second question first. If you advance one slide. Okay, so one person astutely noted that we did not have on that list preparation of school leaders. We've gone back and forth over the last few years about whether or not we were going to allow research on prospective leaders, so pre-service leaders is how we refer to them here. And one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about it in a second, is that all of our research must address student outcomes. And everyone who does research in this area knows that even though our instincts say that school leaders matter, and there's actually good evidence to support that they matter, that evidence shows that it's often a very long pathway between who leaders are and what they do and improving student outcomes. So we have models where they make improvements to the school, and then those changes affect student outcomes. There are models where they're going through teacher quality or teacher selection. So it takes an extremely long time, possibly, for us to see changes in student outcomes that are based on pre-service training. And our grants simply are not long enough to capture that. And so for the first few years that we were here, we would see a lot of applications that really just had almost no chance of being funded because it was very difficult for reviewers to believe that those changes would be seen as part of the grant. The second part is that there are, it's an attrition problem from studies, and that many of the people that are getting certified and going through the pre-service training don't become principals. So it's a problem for the design of the studies. And so what we are allowing for are pre-service programs that are short enough that it's actually tenable, that someone could go through the program, be assigned to the school, make changes in the school, and have those changes improve student outcomes in the course of one of our grants. Does that help?
Yep, I think you answered it very well. Thanks, Katina.
Okay, so again, to this point, we allow work on alternative certification pathways, and we have set a limit of 20, those are programs that are 24 months or less. And then if you are doing exploratory projects, we're a little ahead of ourselves because we haven't talked about goals. But if you're working at goal 1 and would like to study pre-service programs, it doesn't matter how long they are. Our assumption is that you would be using extant data, in which case you would be able to analyze that over the course of the grant. Okay. And so the second point on this is that this particular topic doesn't support research on leaders at pre-K or the post-secondary level. And so that doesn't mean that we wouldn't fund them, only that you can't apply to do them underneath this topic, which is restricted to K-12 education. We actually have separate topics for research done at the early childhood education level, as well as the post-secondary level. So as long as your project otherwise met the requirements for those topics, you would be able to apply to study leaders at that level there. Okay? And so the second question was, how come there have been so few grants since 2004? And I think the answer is almost identical to the answer to the other question. And that's these types of studies are very hard, and there's many ways in which they could go wrong over the course of the grant. And I think that that is some of the things that the reviewers are honing in on as they are reviewing the grants. And I suspect that we get less of them than you believe.
Oh. And one of those topics, which is the issue of attrition, as well as the numbers of individual leaders who need to be included in a research project, is the topic of a IES workshop, I believe, that's going to take place at UCEA's annual convention this fall.
Yes, our working titles is How Many Principals Do You Need for This Study?
Thanks, Katina.
Okay, to the next slide. So this is also a barrier to many leadership applications, and we mentioned it very briefly a second ago. And that's your study must actually address student outcomes as part of the study. So many people have theories of change and logic models that look at principles. And so, for example, it might say principles improve things with teachers, then teachers improve things for students, and we'll see ultimately that this improves, I'll just pick things, students' grades in science. We have a project that's actually the exact model. The problem with many applications is that they would be measuring what principals know and what they did and what teachers knew and what they did, but would stop and not include the student outcomes. And so if your study does not include student outcomes and does not propose to measure those student outcomes as part of the study, it will not be eligible for funding. And so the exact language that's in the RFA is what's here. Is that you must include measures of student academic outcomes that are important to students, parents, teachers, and administrators, and we have given some examples. Now, we do allow social behavioral outcomes in this topic, but social behavioral outcomes alone would not be sufficient for this particular topic. So Michelle, I'm going to break for a second. Are there any other questions about topics?
No questions about topics at this point. I think a couple of comments about the explanation you provided about preparation was quite helpful, and also the emphasis around PD for hard-staffed schools.
Yes. Okay, so if we could go back one slide. So we started at the very beginning with saying that when you're trying to apply through 84305A, you had to pick a topic and a goal. And so these are the 5 goals that are currently available. And it's really useful to think first what type of question that I'm trying to answer and what research methods am I going to use. And as we go through these goals, I'll try to hone in types of questions and methods that are most appropriate. So the exploration goal is really for answering questions, how does A relate to B? So we're looking for associations between malleable factors and education outcomes. And so the phrase malleable factors is really interesting in the context of this topic. So we're looking for things that are under control of the school system that can be changed. So there are lots of factors that may influence education, like socioeconomic status, gender, whether or not the kids are being fed at home, but those aren't things that the school system can actually change, so they wouldn't be eligible for study in that exact form underneath this topic. So again, we want to see associations between malleable factors and education outcomes. An example of a current study that does this is looking at school leaders' management skills. So the study is trying to describe leaders' management skills, what the researchers are calling the leaders' orientations, and they're actually doing time logs to measure leadership behaviors, and then they're trying to see which of these skills or rather how these skills, orientations, and behaviors are related to student outcomes. And so we're also looking for the study to identify factors and conditions that may mediate or moderate relations between the factors and student outcomes, since it's often not the case that it's just what the principals do that matter. It's that interaction between the principal and the school context and the teachers and the students, et cetera, that's going to lead to the different changes in outcomes. And so at this level, we are really looking at analyses of secondary data sets, whether these are large existing data sets that are in your system, or we're allowing people to collect primary data to analyze on its own or in conjunction with existing data sets. And we actually now, for the past couple of years, are offering the option of people doing meta-analyses of existing studies.
So, Katina, can you mention or say a little bit more about the types of student outcomes that different researchers are including in their studies?
So it really depends on what they believe that the leadership study is supposed to do. So, for example, we have a current exploration study that is trying to improve math and science. And they think that school leaders should be instructional leaders in this area, and they should be able to help improve use of science and math technology for teachers. And so the outcomes for this study are student achievement in math and science. But you may have a study where you think working with the leader is going to improve the school climate. And the outcome that you're trying to move is keeping kids in school. So if we create a school that is safer for kids to be out, will they be absent less or drop out less? Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
the outcome needs to be appropriate to your theory of change.
Okay.
And I would suggest that if anyone has any questions about the outcomes that they're looking for, or rather looking to study, they should just send me an email and set up a call, and we can talk about whether or not they would be sufficient for the work.
Terrific. Thanks, Katina.
So moving on to development. So within a development and innovation project, this is where we give money for people to create and invent new things or improve existing things. So if you have a curriculum, an instructional approach, or policy that you want to develop from scratch or improve, this is where you would apply. And so over the course of the grant, you would be expected to do the development work. I'm going to click here. Thank you. And this process is expected to be iterative, meaning that you would do some development, get feedback, try to see what needs to be improved, and do some additional development until you receive the final product. 2 more clicks. Okay, and then during this process, you would be expected to collect data on usability and feasibility of your intervention, as well as collect pilot data on student outcomes. And so 2 examples of currently funded projects to do this. The first one is at Syracuse University. It's a school leadership communication model. Their theory of change is that many principals do not know how to communicate well with teachers, parents, students, etc., and that these communication roadblocks eventually lead to problems in student outcomes. And so they have taken a model from medicine where there are essentially actors who are trained to represent sample parents and teachers with common problems that principals would face. And so the principal is trained through interactions with these I'm trying to think what I always say actors, but there's actually a term for the people that they're interacting with. And the idea is that by improving principal communication, they would be able to improve student outcomes. And so they are actually towards the very end of their grant and should be closing soon, and we'll have some examples of that. And then we have other projects that are looking at improving leadership through feedback and coaching. So in that example, they are soliciting feedback from teachers on how principals can improve their practice. And then they created the second version of the intervention in which, in addition to receiving the feedback, principals would also be coached. So in our efficacy and replication projects, what we're trying to see is whether or not a fully developed intervention, so that is something that already exists and does not require any additional development work, is efficacious. So that means, does it in fact improve the outcomes that it is intended to improve? And so that's the majority of what we get under this topic. However, you could also apply under this topic to collect follow-up data from studies that we already know to work. You can replicate studies, and you can also look at secondary data sets as well, as long as the question that you're asking is causal. And so one example of this type of work is the study that we have that is evaluating the Balanced Leadership Professional Development Program for school leaders that was developed by McCrell, the Mid-Continent Research for Education and Learning. So there are a lot of questions that you should ask yourself if you're doing this type of work. And we're really speeding through these here. If you're interested in learning more in depth about the requirements for individual goals, you should actually go to our website and download the slides for the 2.5-hour grant writing webinar that goes through these things in minute detail. So just sort of an overview of the big things is that you want to see what would be needed to implement the intervention under routine practice. You want to make sure that there's no apparent conflict of interest for developers and evaluators. And that's actually a crucial distinction in our development goals. We actually expect the developers to be really involved in the research, and there's less of a question about impartiality, though in this goal we think of it as being a crucial thing. And we also encourage mediator analyses, but it is not required.
So Katina, you just mentioned that there are resources available to help people kind of gain a better understanding of each one of these goal areas on the IES website. And I think you mentioned that these were webinars, recordings of previous webinars, is that right?
Correct. So we have a webinar series where we do presentations very similar to these, as well as some that are more in-depth. And if you go to ies.ed.gov/funding and scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see the information about the webinar. And you should be able to download PowerPoint presentations and transcripts for the webinars that have been held. Okay. And so there's a bit of a delay, but if you look at the one for the grant writing, the 2.5-hour grant writing one, we spend a lot of time on the individual goals. We just have more time and more examples. Okay? Yep. Some of the slides aren't there yet, so you should keep looking back if that particular one isn't there yet. But the eventual goal is to have the slides and the transcripts for all of them. The next topic, the next goal is the effectiveness goal. And this is to evaluate whether fully developed interventions that have previous evidence that they work can be, will still work when they're implemented under typical conditions. And so to apply under this category, you have to have at least 2 studies that show that the intervention or policy or practice that was previously evaluated had positive effects on student outcomes. And so currently we have no leadership projects that fall under this goal. Next. So we expect researchers to implement under routine practice. Again, we want evidence of no conflict of interest, and there needed to be pretty strong evidence that this worked, at least in some context, before applying for effectiveness goal. And I think those are the key points, though the others are here as well for you to look at later. Our final goal is the measurement goal. And we have 2 education and leadership projects under this, one of which primarily was to develop a new assessment, and one was to validate an existing assessment. And both of those are encouraged under the measurement goal. And so the first one you might be familiar with, it was to continue development and also to validate the Vanderbilt Assessment of Leadership in Education. And so this was an assessment that's trying to rate the effectiveness of principal leadership behaviors. And then we also funded researchers to develop something called the Comprehensive Assessment of Leadership for Learning, or CALL. And so this is a rubric-based online formative assessment system that's being implemented at the middle and high school level. And so again, through this goal, you could apply to validate or develop or some combination of both. And so here, again, it's very critical that the assessment is validated against student outcomes. And so the same set of outcomes that we would be looking for in our other grants, we're also looking for underneath this goal. All right, and the last two slides for this particular RFA. The first one is for people who have applied to us before. Next slide, thank you. And that's please be attentive to changes in the RFA in goals and in topics. There's too many small things to mention here, so we just ask that you carefully read the full RFA. One major change that you should be aware of is now we've added a requirement for people to discuss how they think they're going to disseminate the results of their work. And so that's to practitioners, policymakers, etc. And lastly, this will give you an idea of the funding amounts that are available for the different types of research. You should note that the years vary by goal, and the maximums include both the direct and indirect costs. And you should also know that these are hard maximums. If you submit an application that is for time that is beyond what is allowed, so a 3-year project for something that's limited to 2 years, or if you apply and it's over budget, it will not be reviewed. Okay, so hard budget and length maximum. So if you have any questions about these things, please do email me and we can talk about your work. It should be mentioned that we have what's called a letter of intent process. That time is past, but in letters of intent, people send us through our system descriptions of their work, and we could tell them whether or not they've identified the right topic, the right goal, whether or not they have the right outcomes, etc. So our letter of intent system has closed, but if you simply send me an email, and the address will be at the end of the presentation, I can give you that same type of feedback directly. And so now I'm going to turn the presentation over to James, who is going to discuss our partnership RFA. So again, the discussion that we've just been having was about the 84305A RFA, which is education research, and this is now the 84.305H RFA.
Okay, thank you, Katina, and I hope that I can provide everybody with some background, some meaningful background on the 305H program. This is a program that combines two programs that were previously separate programs, the evaluation of state and local policies and the research or practitioner partnerships, which are topics 3 and 1, respectively, with a new program, which is the continuous improvement research in education topic. So moving to the next slide. The goals here are slightly different than in the Education Research Grants program. And in particular, there's a premium put on developing and maintaining partnerships with state and local agencies. The intent behind this is that it's going to increase the relevance of the research that is conducted, and it's also going to increase the usability of the findings from that research. There's a secondary intent behind this program, and that is that we want to help districts and state education agencies to develop their internal capacity to carry out research, and that research might be research that makes constructive use of existing databases that oftentimes don't get used for research purposes. We also want to increase the capacity of districts and state education agencies to make use of research findings. Next slide. So, as I mentioned before, there are 3 topics within this Partnerships and Collaborations program. The first is the Researcher Practitioner Partnerships, and this topic, it supports a new or an existing partnership which is going to do several things. One is they are going to carry out initial research. Oftentimes the research is of an exploratory nature. They will also be engaged in some partnership building activities, and they will develop a plan for further research. The second topic, which is continuous improvement research in education, this topic supports well-established partnerships. And the intent here is that the partnership will adapt and revise an existing approach or approaches using continuous improvement strategies. And the third topic, evaluation of state and local education programs and policies, is really, in some ways, this is similar to topic number 4, which Katina just mentioned, which is to carry out a rigorous evaluation of an education program or policy that are implemented under routine conditions. And an important requirement here being that it is the state or local education agency that is actually carrying out the program. So I'm ready for the next slide.
So James, by carrying out the program, are you talking about the research program, or are you talking about, like, for example, a licensure program or a program accreditation program?
Yes, and a licensure or an accreditation program. Yeah, I'm definitely talking about program as something that is separate from the research.
Okay. One of the questions that came in around that would be whether or not a project that looked at state program approval of both alternative and regular preparation programs would be something that would fit within that area, taking a look at the impact of these programs in terms of placement, characteristics of schools, hiring the leaders, retentive, relative to traditional programs in a particular state, etc.
Right. You know what I think would be a good idea is let's hold that question, because that sounds like an important and detailed question. And what I would like to do is go through the requirements for each of these topics, and then once we kind of get the requirements on the table, then we can take some questions on specific research ideas that people have.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so this slide here that we're looking at, the education issue addressed by 305H applications, is common to all of the topics, and that is that the application has to propose to address an education issue that is of priority to an LEA or SEA. The Institute is particularly interested in applications that address issues of school safety, social behavioral skills and competencies, and implementation of the Common Core state standards. But that being said, nobody is going to be penalized for addressing other issues of importance to an education agency.
And And I'd like to interject that unlike some programs across the department, those are suggestions, not priorities that have points attached to them. So if you're doing work in the area of education leadership, as long as that is something that is of interest to the LEA and the SEA, then you would meet the general content requirements. Whether or not you met the other requirements is another question entirely. But in general, as long as leadership was something important, you could, to the LEA or SEA, you could consider the HRFA.
So a couple more requirements that are consistent across the three topics. And one is that the research that is conducted must address education outcomes for students, including at least one of these categories. And the first being academic outcomes, and those span from grades and test scores to high school completion and other measures of educational success. The social and behavioral competencies are the second category of outcomes that can be considered. And the reason that we include this in a separate category on this slide is because you actually can do a research project here that would focus solely on social and behavioral competencies as an outcome, whereas you can't do that under the Improving Education Systems topic in 305A. We focus on students from pre-kindergarten through post-secondary and adult education. We focus on typically developing students and or students with disabilities or at risk for disabilities. So to clarify what this means is that you can have a project that focuses solely on students with disabilities. If you do, you'll be talking to a program officer other than myself, but you can do that. You can also combine a project that looks at both typically developing students and students with disabilities, or you can focus entirely on typically developing students. If you choose to focus on students that are at risk for disabilities, then there are some specific requirements for identifying students that are at risk. Okay, some more specific requirements. The partnership may be new if you're applying under topic 1 or 3, collaborative partnerships or the evaluation of state and local policies, or it has to be existing if you're applying under continuous improvement. The applications must include at least one principal investigator from a research institution and at least one principal investigator from a state or local education agency. The PI from the research institution must have the ability and capacity to conduct scientifically valid research, and they must have expertise in the field of education that is being addressed, or the education issue that's being addressed. And the PI from the state or local education agency must have decision-making authority pertaining to the issue that is the object of study in the research project. This slide here gives some examples of the partnering agencies. For state education agencies, you can have the state education agency, you can have departments within the agency or boards and commissions. You can have an agency that oversees either early learning or elementary, secondary, or post-secondary higher education, as well as adult education. You can also have a tribal education agency or a education agency in a U.S. territory. In the U.S. territory, that agency would actually be similar to a state education agency. Local education agencies that meet the requirements for this topic are, by and large, local education agencies, school districts. You can also have a community college district. You can have a state or a city post-secondary system. In the instance that you partner with a city post-secondary system, then there's a set of additional requirements that pertain to whether that city district can stand on its own, or whether you have to have an additional partner in the application. So if there is a state system that's overseeing that city post-secondary system, then they need to be included as a partner. If there is no state system, then the city education agency can stand on its own. And there's an additional requirement that a post-secondary system cannot be both the education agency partner and the research institution or institution partner on the same project. So you can have multiple state or local education agencies if they share similar concerns. They should not be added on just as a matter of convenience because they already have a relationship with a third-party program or research organization. Non-education state and local agencies can also be added as partners as long as an education agency is a partner. The partnerships can also include more than one research institution if they have shared interests and will make unique contributions. One of those partners will need to be the primary co-PI on the project. And then you can also include other non-research organizations, such as issue-oriented or stakeholder groups that will contribute to the partnership. Sometimes those organizations might have expertise about a particular approach that you're going to be assessing. So what I'm going to do here in the next set of slides is just walk through the three topics. And the first topic, as I've mentioned, is the Research Practitioner Partnerships topic. And this topic is intended to do several things. But the most important thing, as with all of the 305H grants, is it must address an education issue that's of key importance to the agency. It also must directly contribute to agency program and policy decisions. And what I mean by that is during the course of the research project, there will probably be meetings in which you'll have a steering committee that will be looking at the issue. And the decisions that come out of those meetings are intended to have some impact on the agency policy and operation of its program that is the object of study. The topic one also provides an opportunity to develop partnership collaboration through these initial research activities. And the partnership is also expected to develop a longer-term research plan. The secondary goal of this topic is to foster longer-term research partnerships that can do more than they will do in the 2 years that are devoted to the original project. Let's move to the next slide. So the main activities during the project would be to carry out initial research regarding the education issue. An example of things that currently funded projects are doing is using administrative databases to explore the relation between state or district-sponsored interventions and student outcomes. Another thing that one of the funded projects is doing is constructing on-track indicators for students and schools. So for example, if you wanted to examine the relationship between a specific set of school leader practices and student outcomes, and you had administrative data that was tracking school leader activities, and you could connect those activities to student outcomes, then you could do an exploratory analysis using administrative data in which you would look at the relationship between the school leader activities and those student outcomes of interest. The second main set of activities that you're going to have under topic 1 are developing the partnership, and this is going to occur through structured stakeholder meetings, school site meetings, and focus groups, or community forums in which the partnership will present its objectives and findings to the broader community. All of those different types of activities are not required. Those are just examples of the kinds of activities that are customary. The final work that will go on in a topic 1 research project is that the partnership will develop a plan for further research on the issue. And part of this plan will be a assessment of future data collection needs. So if, for example, the administrative data are not sufficient to really measure what school leaders are doing, then the partnership will outline some future measures that will be collected to capture those activities. So this slide here really just summarizes what I've already said. These are the things that you'll report on at the end of the project. The description of the partnership, the results of the initial research, a plan for future research, and some recommendations for maintaining the partnership, as well as a summary of the lessons learned from developing the partnership. Topic number 2 within 305H is the continuous improvement research in education topic. The primary objective here is to implement, adapt, and revise an existing approach that is being used by the district or SEA that is intended to address an education issue or problem that is of great concern to the SEA or LEA. Because the intent of such a project is to adapt and revise the approach, the initial approach will differ from the eventual approach. And so the initial approach that's taken at the beginning of the project will reflect the knowledge and capabilities of the partnership, as well as the research literature on what is expected to work in the given situation that the partnership is working. Throughout the course of the research project, the partnership will use a short cycle process of data collection, review, and revision to iteratively adapt and refine implementation of the approach. And finally, in year 3 or year 4, the partnership will pilot the revised approach to identify the promise of effectiveness for its impact on student outcomes. What we're basically pointing to here is that the analysis is not expected to be causal but it is supposed to assess the effectiveness of the approach. Some of the goals here of the continuous improvement topic are to foster longer-term research partnerships that will sustain collaborative research even after the grant funds are expended. Also, to foster the capacity of the state or local agency to conduct its own research internally, including iterative implementation research. And finally, to contribute to a broader understanding of how specific approaches can be adopted to address local conditions during widespread implementation, as well as how researchers and practitioners can collaborate to conduct implementation research that measurably improves practice. Some of the requirements for this topic is that the project must build on an existing partnership that has at least 1 year of prior work, must address an education issue that's of prime importance to the SEA or LEA. It should propose a clear approach with a theoretical and/or empirical base of support for addressing the issue that is of concern to the SEA or LEA. And the grant program will fund research and partnership activities as well as some training activities, but is not intended to fund costs of the program or intervention. The expected products slide is a list of things that I've already described, which are things that you will describe at the end of the project, which is the partnership itself, the education issue that the partnership has addressed, the description of the initial approach, as well as the final approach at the end of the project, including identification of the changes made in the approach and the changes made in the education system to accommodate the approach, as well as the reason for those changes, and a description of the research process or strategy used to adapt and revise the approaches, along with the data summaries upon which these revisions were based. We've got a long list here. You will also describe the results from the pilot study, and you'll provide a determination as to whether the approach is ready for a full evaluation, something that could happen under topic number 3. You'll provide a recommendation for how the partnership can be maintained over the longer term, as well as specific and general lessons from the revisions to the approach and changes made in the education system that improved the approach and its implementation, as well as lessons learned from the joint development work performed by the partnership that could be of use to other partnerships. Topic 3 is evaluation of state and local education programs and policies. The main objective here is to promote joint evaluation research by research institutions and SEAs or LEAs. This, again, is research conducted on an education program or policy that is of key importance to the SEA or LEA. The program or policy, the research will directly contribute to SEA or LEA program and policy decisions, and the research will also provide an opportunity to develop the partnership through evaluation. I will point out here that the intent here is to evaluate well-formed programs and policies. This is different from topic 2, in which you're basically iteratively adapting and revising a program or a policy. Another main objective of the topic number 3 is to foster longer-term research partnerships by providing and supporting the use of rigorous research-based evidence in decision-making, and through continuing practitioner input into the research agenda. Broadly, the partnership should identify an education program or policy implemented by an SEA or LEA. This should be of high priority to that agency, and it should be intended to improve student achievement. In fact, there should be some evidence that the program or policy is likely to improve student achievement. And the partnership will carry out an evaluation of that program or policy. The expected products of the grant are causal evidence of the impact of a clearly specified program or policy implemented by an SEA or LEA. And in order to arrive at the causal evidence, the project has to have a research design that will support causal inference. Finally, the partnership will arrive at conclusions on and revisions to the theory of change that guides the program or policy. And this should contribute to overall general theoretical understanding of education processes and procedures. If a beneficial impact is found, this supports tools and procedures needed for sufficient implementation of the core components of the program or policy under routine practice should be identified. If a beneficial impact is not found, a determination should be made whether and what type of further research would be useful to revise the program policy and/or its implementation. And finally, the project should lay out what the final financial costs of the program or policy are. The maximum award amounts for the 305H grants are as follows. For 305H researcher practitioner partnerships, this is topic number 1. The maximum amount is $400,000 over 2 years. For topic number 2, which is continuous improvement research, the maximum amount is $2.5 million over 4 years. And for topic number 3, which is evaluation of state and local policies, the maximum award is $5 million over a maximum duration of 5 years. So I'm going to turn it back to Katina so that she can kind of get to the finish line here with the final set of slides regarding applications and submissions.
Okay, we have a few slides in 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to go through these as quickly as possible so we can take a couple of final questions. When applying to any federal grant, you should realize that the likelihood of an electronic application going wrong is pretty high. So we suggest that you start applying as early as possible. So the crucial date and time for you that these applications across all of our requests for applications is September the 4th. Unlike last year, we only have one application deadline, and they are due by 4:30 and 0 seconds Washington, D.C. time as determined by the grant.gov clock. So our having the seconds there is not a mistake. If it comes in 1 second late, it will be rejected. So we encourage you to apply at least a day early, possibly a couple of days early. It doesn't take that long to apply, but it could take a long time to figure out where the error is if something goes wrong during the application process. The actual packages are already online, and we have a really nifty application submission guide that goes through how to apply in very careful detail. Other dates that you should keep in mind are the start dates. So please, when designing your application, keep in mind that the earliest the research could actually start is July 1st, 2014, and the latest is September 1st, 2014. If you're going to apply, you need 3 documents. It is impossible to successfully apply without all of them. The first is the request for applications. So far today, we discussed 2 different requests for applications. The 84305A request for applications, which includes the Improving Education Systems topic, and the 84305H applications, that request for applications that James just discussed, that included those 3 partnership topics. So remember, 84305A and 84305H. You also want to download the application submission guides that includes really technical things like literally how do you upload your document, font size and page requirements, etc. And then there's the actual application package, which is the set of forms you will be filling out electronically. And so the location of each of those documents is shown here. It's a lot to take in, so we've actually created an application process webinar. The final session of it is going to be held next Tuesday at 2 p.m., so we suggest that you sign up for it. And not just the researcher, we suggest that people from sponsored programs offices also sign up to take this, because ultimately they're the ones that press send, and it's helpful for them to know what is involved. Transcripts from the earlier sessions as well as the PowerPoint should also be available online. And so earlier, someone asked, how do we find the examples or rather the transcripts and the slides from previous webinars? That link also works to locate those. So if you go to ies.ed.gov/funding/webinars, you can sign up for upcoming webinars and download materials from previous webinars. Next. Okay, so one of the big questions that we often receive is, what happens to my application once I submit it? And so this is what we refer to as the peer review process. So this is post-submission. We have, as we discussed at the very beginning of the webinar, an office called Standards and Review, and it is their job to oversee the review process. At IES, we have somewhat of a firewall between program staff, like myself and James, and review staff. This allows us to give you feedback on your ideas as well as whether or not they meet the requirements for topics and goals. And then once you submit, we are no parts of the review process. When your application comes in, someone will review it for compliance. That's for formatting issues and also whether or not it was submitted on time and has all of the components. If you're compliant, you'll go on to Responsiveness Screening. This is closer to whether or not you fit the topic and the goal requirement. If you meet all of those requirements, you will be assigned to a panel. The first thing that happens is there will be 2 to 3 people who will review your application, and they will score it on significance, research plan, personnel, and resources, and give it an overall score of how, or the strength of the research. If they believe that this is something that should move forward, they'll give you a better score. Those scores that are strong enough will move on to panel, and those that are not will be triaged, meaning they will only receive those first 2 or 3 initial reviews. Keep in mind that when you go to review, it is unclear the particular expertise of the people that will be reviewing your work. Applications that are submitted to Improving Education Systems go to the Systems and Broad Reform panel for the most part. It's unclear where those submitted to the HRFA will be reviewed, but in general, if you're submitting an application about leadership, it probably will go to the Systems and Broad Reform panel as well. On that panel, there will be specialists in the area of education leadership, but there will also be a number of generalists and specialists in other topics. So you want to make sure you are describing your work in sufficient detail that the people who are experts in education leadership are on board, but also in plain enough language that people who are not experts can also follow it. And you want to make sure on your team you have experts in every procedure that you'll propose in terms of your research methodology, because this panel will include at least 2 or more methodologists who will be reading what you propose extremely closely. At the end of the process, this is actually a new process. You're going to receive email notifications about the status of the award, and after the review is conducted, you're going to receive summary statements, and 8, possibly 9 months out, if everything works well, you would be notified about whether or not you received the grant. If you do not receive it the first time, please do not give up. There are many people who receive grants the second time they apply, sometimes the third time, and there is a lot of value to receiving the comments from the reviewers. They're very helpful in helping people refine their ideas and their research methods. Lastly, all program officers, including James and I, are here to help, and we are easiest to contact by email, which is on the next slide, and you can email us information about your projects. The earlier we receive it, the better. And that is it for us. I think we are technically to time, but if there's time available within the webinar, we can answer a few more questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead and see if we can address a couple of these questions pretty quickly. One of them is a logistical question, or a clarification question, rather. We had a question from Mike Johannick, who was wondering about the award parameters for the partnership grants, the Research Practitioner partnerships. It said it was a 2-year max duration with a max award of $400,000. He was wondering if that's $400,000 total for both years or $400,000 per year.
It's total.
Total. Okay. All righty. And we had another question. I think this might be for you, Katina. A general question about whether or not there is any place for a linkage between education leadership and special education research. Barb Hazy, University of Texas, notes that most of the personnel preparation programs for leadership personnel have gone to special education to prepare individuals working specifically with students with disabilities, learning disabilities, behavior disorders, autism. So wondering a little clarification there.
That is a really great question with a very tricky answer. So one of the things that we did not bring up at the top of the presentation was the work that's generally funded by our sister center, the National Center for Education Research. They have a parallel topic that I believe is called Special Education Policy and Systems, so I don't have the exact title in front of me. Unfortunately, for FY14, they will not be accepting any new applications. That is where that application should go if they were funding research. So having said that, the question is, what could you do this year? If you're only addressing how leaders work with special education populations, it would not be eligible for improving education systems. But if you were looking at a project that included working with both typically developing and special education students, it would be eligible under the 84305A RFA. That restriction is not in place for the H RFAs. So if you wanted to look at that under one of the 3 topics under H, you would be able to do that this year. Is that a fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. And then we had another question which goes back to the preparation versus PD issue, and specifically the question was around sample sizes. How small is too small, and particularly with regard to, for example, a development and piloting a goal 2 in terms of professional development. How many folks would you be expecting to be enrolled within a goal 2 or even a goal 3 grant?
So that's a question that I can't answer under the phone, and this makes this person an excellent attendee for this September's workshop. I would say, since that's past the deadline for our grant, the quick and dirty answer to that is it depends on your power analysis. You would actually have to do an analysis to see how many principles you would need to find the effect that you're looking for.
So this individual might want to get in touch with you directly.
Yes.
Okay. True.
And even still, I won't be able to get them that much closer. The answer is that they're going to need to hook up with a methodologist who can look at their intervention to see at what level it's being conducted, and then to do a proper power analysis for it.
Okay. And then circling back to the question that came up at the beginning of James's presentation, the question was about the state and local partnerships, and in particular around state policies impacting program approval and licensure, I believe, and whether or not the funding could go for taking a look at possibly setting up systems for tracking placement characteristics, retention, and so forth associated with different forms of preparation, alternative and university-based.
One thing I think is a challenge there is linking to student outcomes.
Okay.
What is your, but let's get Katina to weigh in on this.
So it sounds like it's not a state and local evaluation. We're going to do this by process of elimination because it doesn't sound like they're going to be evaluating the effectiveness of the existing program on student outcomes, which is the primary requirement for a state and local evaluation. And so if they are trying to make ongoing improvements and figure things out, it might be eligible for the continuous improvement, and who knows, it might be eligible under the first topic, the researcher practitioner partnerships. But we don't have enough information to tell you for sure over the phone. This is the very type of question that it's useful for us to have email or phone exchanges about, because we need sufficient details. One of the things that should have been, we hope we conveyed, is that there's a lot of requirements for the different goals, for the different topics, for the different competitions, and it is helpful for us to have as much information as possible, because people will say, can I do this? And on the surface, it sounds like the answer is yes, but when we get more details, we find out that they don't fulfill one of the other requirements for that particular topic, goal, or competition.
All righty. One last, what looks to be a fairly quick question, whether or not you have any sense of how many grants that you will be awarding this go around.
No.
No. Okay, that was easy enough.
Yes.
I think we've reached and extended beyond the end of today's webinar on IES funding opportunities for improving education systems. We will be loading this webinar onto the UCEA YouTube channel, so you can come back and visit it again. And also the PowerPoint will be available on the UCEA website, and I assume that, that Katina and James will probably have this linked somewhere on their own website too. But I'd like to thank both of you very much for joining us today, Katina and James. We've had several comments about how very helpful this information has been, so thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Yep.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, so everyone, good luck with your IES grants, and as Katina and James both encouraged you, please feel free to give them a call. They are incredible resources, and let's get those numbers up in education leadership. Well, goodbye, everyone, and have a pleasant week.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.